Hi, I appreciate you all being here, and I appreciate Steve for giving me a chance to talk to you all. Um, a couple months ago, David Rico gave a presentation on the trickster, and I had to laugh because his illustration of the fool fits me to a T. And it reminded me of that tarot card where this person is looking up here, reaching to the future or to get something out there. And this tiny little white dog is trying to say, hey, wait a minute, this is reality down here. And she's about to, or the object, the figure is about to step over into the abyss. And that actually literally happened to me at Monterey Market not very long ago when I was looking up to get a piece of roll of bags, and I tripped over somebody's abandoned uh, hand rack that had a metal edge, gouged my foot, which then became infected. And I thought, well, I'm still doing it. And the other thing I wanted to say about the trickster is my first analyst, the first thing he did was cast the I Ching, and he got the fool. So it's kind of embraced the beginning of my many, many years, 50 years ago, when I first went to an analyst. I've seen quite a few, many of them are gone now, unfortunately. Um, and I began with a young fool. But in that stage, it was innocence. I didn't know what the unconscious was at all. I had no idea. I've been looking ever since I lost my faith in, and when I was at Oberlin and I had to encounter things about the Bible that weren't accurate, perhaps, or just simply I don't know, it was just a transition for me. And I looked and looked and looked and couldn't find a substitute until I found you, and it saved my life. So I imagine all of you, since you've all had some therapy, probably have some sense of that power of Jungian an approach to the psyche and how healing that can be. I'm going to read sections in this book. It's quite long and it ends with a section of poetry, but I'm not reading any poetry today. I'll be giving a poetry reading in 3 weeks for Poetry Flash if you're interested. I would like to start with a quote from Jung. The spectacle of old age would be unendurable if we did not know that our psyche reaches into a region held captive neither by change in time nor by limitation of place. I wanted to explain a little bit about the process of this book. I will read the little chapter heads. There's usually just one per page. If some of you have the book and want to follow along. There are certain aspects. Some of it's a dream. Sometimes it's a vision. The visions are not active imaginations. I don't do that. It's just not Jungian approach. It's just a meditative state where I do deliberately sort of allow myself to think to see what will happen. And sometimes I will receive one that's overwhelming. And those are in here. And that's a different voice, a different experience. And you'll be able to tell the difference. It's pretty obvious, I think. The other thing is this is begun with an analysis. I have had, as I said, years of analysis, and I thought I was completely done, right? You take it and you think you've gone on and you're really with it and you know everything about yourself and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, here I am. I'm 89. This started when I was 77 and I was flabbergasted. So it's just one thing I want to say. This is about aging. And one of the things that you realize, I have realized, is that the work's never done. There's always something more to do. So I'm going to begin with I'll repeat this. Oh, there are two other parts. Besides the dreams and the visions, there's the ego. I speak, I'm reflecting on what's going on. And an analyst who is not just an analyst. It could be me. It could be other analytic voices that I've heard over the years who bring in different things. So it seems like one person, but it isn't. Okay. And this is creative nonfiction in the sense that it's absolutely true, but it's not literally sequential about my life. It's personal, but it isn't autobiographical in that sense. So in the beginning, the list, I hope you don't mind reading it, because there's no way I could do this otherwise. In the beginning, the listener was a mature woman wearing silver earrings. In time, her voice blurred with others, including my own. I came to her after a dream of an attic fire. I thought of the reprobate who hid in the church basement, wondering if it was he whose fury burned down fields and farmhouses in my dreams. I assumed our meetings would extend a week or two until my anxiety eased. I would drive calmly day or night, and all would be well, not as last midnight, when I turned left on an unlit street. Out of hell, a bicyclist darted into my headlights. I was the one least skilled on an Everest crime who slipped, dragging 4 others downward, arms and legs splayed to grasp a cliff face, to cling where nothing was. The first chapter is called Blue Pearls. After my husband's, Jerry's death, Jerry Travis was a surgeon who became a psychiatrist, who became a Jungian analyst, and he died in 2001. And he was a polymath and brilliant and wonderful person. It was my second husband. Anyway, after my husband's death, I felt I did not know how to give my life what it lacked. I worried about a life lasting too long, about falling short of what I should be or become. I told the listener I did not know how to release myself from being driven, to how to free myself from harmful obsessions, long gone battles and defeats. You must get through this before you die. Then came a prescient dream. A lovely woman holds out for me a dress studded with blue pearls. The next chapter is the Serpent. And there's a quote from Zazimos, who was an alchemist in 300 Common Era, whom Jung commented about because of his wisdom. And after I had seen this apparition, I woke and I said to myself, what is the cause of this vision? And this is the vision. In a bright courtyard, I wait. Then an older man wearing blue Persian pants and shirt leads me into a dark, rich-hued interior. He sits down, signals me to sit opposite him. In silence, he studies me, his face deeply grooved and desert weathered, his eyes penetrating. At our feet, a circular pool of sand. Abruptly, he leaps up and thrusts his cane into the center. It begins to bend and sway. To my horror, it rises up before me, an enormous serpent with glittering scales. Its unblinking eyes stare as it weaves over our heads. Then it begins to unfurl wings. This vision came to me when I was alone in the dark, sitting in a deep meditative state. I did not know what the serpent was, but I knew I was meant to know. I felt its primordial power that filled me with paralyzing awe. This serpent is chthonic, of the underground, from which it rises and to which it returns. It strikes instinctively, regardless of the effect on others, on you. This is in me, and you might imagine I shuddered. I was terrified. A box of pins. And I'm just going to read sections from these, not the whole passage. A child is born, this is a dream, a child is born without eyes. A child cannot see what's wrong. A child accepts, adapts. As a child, I lingered long hours among dusty moats in the tower attic of the parsonage, a spacious, drafty Victorian. I loved it, like James Hillman, who was allowed an attic room of his own. This was my private place. I was free to imagine anything. All was not well. Hillman was not neglected. Another dream. I was very little, standing, looking up at my father, when my cherished bronze green elephant dropped between us and shattered. Now pause a minute. That elephant was made of solid and weighed a lot, and there was no way it could shatter in reality, right? It's a true symbol of the self. I was inundated with dreams. In one, a woman is a perfectionist. Marion Woodman, a minister's daughter, like me, said in an interview that being a PK put pressure on her to be perfect. When I was kicked out of Sunday school, I was told rebellion was typical of preachers' kids. Next chapter is called Molting. It's a dream. I am sitting beside a man driving a crisscraft, the water parting and swirling after us. Ahead, a blinding orange light. I discern ahead, in a blinding orange light, I discern a cluster of boats with people leisurely lounging. He speeds around them. Then the water narrows. It darkens. We approach a whitish green fog. I am afraid. Both the blinding orange drenched light and the greenish white fog suggest an alchemical process is being activated. Again, this is a next section, but it's a dream. A woman next to me falls or is pushed. She plummets to her death on a stone landing below. I was alarmed, afraid I had done something terrible. The analyst says, "This death is good." She smiled, but offered no explanation. Coming to the high Sierras. In my journal, I wrote, I must find where my poems belong, find where I fit. I carry my manuscripts through the rain, walking to James Hillman's house. His wife is wearing black, as I am. I come a second time. We both wear crimson. Smiling, this time she takes the manuscripts. I say, these belong to James. James Hillman's writings reflect his insight that image making itself is the key to aesthetics, to the psyche, to life. Second. This one is called Yearning, and it's a quote from Hillman. What you yearn for is what you are. Crossing the street in the dark, two blinking headlights speed toward me. I am 77, death ahead, death. I make a list. Bone aches, arthritis, trigger thumb, ring hand bending like a claw, ear static, scratchy, high-pitched decibels ringing. I yearn for silence. I can't unscrew a jar, can't unpeel a medicine bottle seal, can't spring up from the floor, can't balance on one foot, can't bike over a stone bridge passing a field of poppies. I yearn for strength. I can't run, can't jump, can't remember, can't. Out loud, as old folks do, I say to myself, let go of it all. Old conflicts, old losses, old fine times. Too much good brings nothing but nostalgia, dissatisfaction, longings. In my dream, I parked in my driveway is a silver Jaguar, a magical dream. Yes, I yearn to be Miranda, Prospero's daughter, not Neptune, not Saturn's. Stick of fire. Quote from Rilke, there is no place that does not see you. Quote from Edinger, everywhere the alchemical fire, everywhere the eye of God. Dream, a field of small marks vibrating organize themselves into two circles, two owl eyes. The owl sees me, the tallest spruce with Spanish moss dripping from its dying branches sees me. The white clay tinged with shades of ochre sees me, my shovel blade, my footprint, but not God. At Oberlin, my first year away from home, the God I had ardently prayed to on my knees beside my bed became an illusion, a betrayal. It goes back farther. Something happened to you as a child made the church impossible. A familiar man whose features I cannot discern precisely is teaching me how to fit stained glass into a lead frame. Fit together as in a sanctuary, a rose window, or a chart stained glass casting their hues into the interior. Outside, the dream, outside, after hearing a poet read what the rulers had done to him, his suffering told with humility and gentle humor, a woman turns her head to the left and her amazed face glows. I turn to look, and look too late to flee that violent, luminous light. This is called Candlesticks, and I'm going to preface it by saying that my mother had a pair of silver candlesticks. There were three. You could have it as single, but you could add it so it would be 3 and 3. And if you do the I Ching, you can understand how important the number 3 becomes. And the other thing is that I have only 2 things from her, and this was one that I still own. And the title is called Candlesticks. The first dream, a bridge over a torrential river. a crisis. If I do not cross over, I will wander, lost, unseeing and unseen. Excuse me. Second dream. Packing to leave. I have little space left in my trunk, piles that won't fit. 3 tall candlesticks, each in a different color. What can I do with them? A broom, a pail, a mop. An indignant cleaning lady says, "They're mine." I stack items against the wall beside a red motorboat. Distressed to leave so much, I have 10 minutes to catch a train. I have no idea where that train is heading, but I want to catch it. It's time I stopped playing servant. One of the Jungian women analysts, 4 female types, all defined in relation to men. Are their candlestick symbols romantic? Am I to leave them as well? Oh no, you inherited them from your mother. Take them with you. They are important feminine symbols. The next group is called Fatal Disease. And it begins with a dream. Night, an out-of-town bar filled with young people drinking, eating, some singing, some dancing, pointing upward with one, then the other index finger. My dancing daughter, laughing, looks at me. I intuit she has told them this is my birthday. It is already 10:30, and I'm tired and want to go home, but I can't find my black purse. I go out to my car thinking I left it inside. My car isn't there. Walking down the road, I pass dirt front yards, and there, walking down the road, worn out looking houses. I return everyone, even my daughter, and the cars are gone. Alone and frantic, I shout, "Everything's gone, my driver's license, my cards, my car with new tires." Then I hear a resonant and low male voice, "Remember the fatal disease." I cry out and wake, obviously terrified. Each dream has as many aspects as a peacock's tail, but fundamentally, this dream is about nearing 80 and not being centered. Comes one of these visions. Crossing a deep and treacherous ravine over a raging river. My feet sense wood has become rope. I'm halfway, hanging onto 2 sides of rope for balance as the bridge trembles and sways. I step 1 foot at a time, then pause to regain balance. Steadying. A man's voice instructs, "Stand upright." I do. The side ropes become firmer. I reach the edge, a shelf of land. I step onto it. I have to let go of the ropes. Frightened, I can't move. I'm going to do a little quick one on this. One of my poetry books was called Sundered, and it was based on rage, falling into overwhelming rage at what was a deep and harmful personal experience caused by someone who had once called me her best friend. It was shattering. And rage is hard to live with. Once Sundered was published, I had to arrange readings, a task I find onerous. When the book arrived, I was moved by my daughter's cover image from her painting Premonition of Jerry's death. Rereading the poetry after all these years. How long? 13 since I had written it. I was surprised. I found it powerful, and it hardly seemed composed by me. Some other voice had spoken through me. A man with indents for eyes, this is a dream, and pock-marked face takes my hand. I let him hold it a while, and then he presses it against his heart, saying, "You will be a poet." He is a version of the blind Tiresias. He raises the question, what kind of poet will you become? This is a section called Owneric Vision. Standing beside me as we watch an eclipse of the sun, my beloved puts his arm around me. At the moment of totality, at the diamond effect, we hold hands. The second one, in my daughter-in-law's kitchen, I am helping fix breakfast when my son calls me to an adjoining room. Gesturing toward the window, he exclaims, "Look!" Just above the trees hovers an immense sphere, huge, glittering like a moon or planet of diamond chips, silver and gold. Keep these, hold them. Your eyes have such light. The sacred way. The fire in the interior of the house, combined with silver electric snake. Oh, here, I've forgotten this is a dream and then a commentary. Outside with my married poet friends, I watch a conflagration inside the house, consuming everything, even the furniture. A silvery snake emerges from the bed sheets, disappears, then re-emerges elsewhere, electric, incandescent. The fire in the interior of the house, combined with the silver electric snake in your bed, symbolize death. You must face this death consciously. Dream. I am handed an age-darkened gold and phthalo green canoe with an ebony snake carved along the side. The snake's reared head shapes the prow. I dreamed I composed a long narrative and titled it, "Hello, Sacred Way." In the morning, I'd forgotten the narrative, but I realized it was a string of ordinary events. This is a section called section of the whole book called Organ Symphony, and it has a quote from Jung. In the final analysis, we count as something only because of the essential we embody. And if we do not embody that, our life is wasted. Or he said life is wasted, not but life itself is wasted. And this is the last entry in the book. At home in the dark, longing for I knew not what, I dropped down into a meditative stillness, hoping my guide would come. I heard a woman's voice. "Do you see me?" Before me she stands, tall and willowy in a lightly spun, full-length gown tinted a subtle shade of sunset green. She holds in her hands a large sphere made of shimmering, silvery gold flecked particles that emanate light. "Put your hand into it." I do, thinking, this is impossible. Finding no resistance, my hand, wrist, and forearm disappear, becoming part of it. I withdraw my hand, expecting all will be as it was. My hand, wrist, and forearm have been transmuted into that same strange substance. Then, as I watch, amazed as it begins to flow through me, until my whole body is luminescent. It flowed, transforming me into all that was me and all that was not me. Then, in a voice not human, I heard the word kindness, and I understood what she had been trying to give me from the beginning. That's the end of the book. So now I'm opening for whatever you'd like to ask or talk about.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. That was very moving.
It's personal. I'm sorry.
Phyllis, do you have a relationship with boats? And you said part of your dream was a Chris craft.
What? Pardon me. Would you repeat the question?
Yeah, you mentioned an image of a Chris craft boat.
Yeah.
Do you have a relationship with that, or was it?
There are lots. I mean, Chris Croft could be Christ crucified, couldn't it?
That's what I was thinking when you said it. And you were on the water above the unconscious, so it just seemed interesting to me.
There, without getting into, but that's wonderful. See, I'm already informed. I hadn't even noticed it. Thank you. Any other questions? Statements? I don't bite.
Let's see.
Jane, go ahead.
Thank you. I was hoping that you would talk a little bit about your thoughts about aging and death and how they relate to the visions and the dreams.
Okay, well, let's say that I think it's crucial. I kind of try to suggest this, there's a sense when you've had a lot of analysis, and I've had tons of it, and I lived with an analyst for many years. So you tend to think you've done your work. And the weird thing is that when you're as old as I am, I'm 89 now, the inevitable is down the road. There's no question that you're going to die. And it throws you back and into I don't know if I can fully say, but I tried to put that sense of everything's that when I was talking about that poem where you can't do this and you can't do that, and as you get older, you become more and more aware of your limitations and what you can't. Every choice you make, every single choice you make, affects your next step, and it's a burden. And it's also it's so easy to be depressed by regrets. It's so easy to look back and say, if I only done this, if I'd only known that, and it's hard to not to end up crucifying yourself all over again. I don't know if that answers it or not. I think it's probably the most important part of the end of life is finding what needs to finally come to the surface. And
But needs what did you say?
come to the surface. I skipped a section I should have read, and maybe I better find it. It's called What the Body Knows. And I had read this, I read the section before it, Fatal Disease. I'm going to read two pieces. I'm going to have to read two. A single bed, a silent meal. No, here it is. Walking through the woods, I come to a clearing. A man stands at an easel. A man stands at an easel holding a white board. On it, he had drawn in a black outline a large eye with rays from it. black lines from it. He sends a little child into the forest to get something. I worry what might happen to her, but the child does not seem afraid. The eye of God, a sun god, the child seems fearless. Perhaps she's used to it. For years, I played alone in the vacant church while my father was occupied. What you don't see is that the father isn't caring for the child. The child doesn't understand fear and should not have been sent into the forest alone. My father was a powerful minister. He was a congregational minister who was deeply pacifist because of some things that had happened to him. During World War I, he was an ambulance driver because he didn't want to carry a gun. In our house, we were not allowed to fight. I had an older sister and an 8-year older brother. We were not allowed to raise our voices in anger. Everything was suppression. And my father was not only a builder, he built a huge addition to the church that was almost a half a city block with a children's chapel and an auditorium. He was aesthetic, everything was beautiful. He was so well known and so popular that he had to have 2 services for 250 people at each, 2 choirs. They had a junior choir, a children's choir. He gave the graduation service for my high school. When he resigned from the big church, the man that followed him was given an honorary doctorate of divinity. So he's a very powerful man, but he was absolutely vehemently against any kind of anger or violence. Okay, what the body knows, the next section. A dear friend whom I've known for years was visiting for a week. We had a terrible row. As it escalated, I became unable to speak. His anger felt huge. Shaken and nauseated, I fled into my bedroom and locked the door. He shouted outside of it. Eventually, he left. I lay on my bed, curled into a fetal position, trembling and icy cold. My whole body began to shudder in waves of upheaval. The wetness of tears, short, shallow, panting, my mind opaque. No sensation of time. It began to subside, then resumed with less force. Quiet, I lay motionless, enervated. He returned, knocked, softly pleaded with me to let him in, telling me he has horrible dreams if he goes to sleep without working through a problem. I let him in. We talked, and at the end hugged each other affectionately. Abreaction. I never had this happen before. It could happen because you knew you could trust him. He would never harm you. Variations of this trauma have appeared in dreams. In my 50s, my now deceased analyst sent me to a body therapist to try to understand why I was having nightmares, while at the same time, I was very happy in my marriage, my poetry writing, my professional life. One day, she put pressure on the coin-sized area of my back where spasms occur, beside a thumb-sized deformation in my spine. I became overwhelmed with revulsion. Nauseated, I got myself home, driving as if I were feeble, then showered, then fell into a deep midday sleep. My analyst and I gradually decided that when I was little, an adult male had attacked me. I could remember only lying curled up on a wood floor, the shoes, a man's black lace shoes, the smell of damp wool as if in a cloakroom. I think of it now and then when my back goes into spasms. That's the piece I left out. I guess that might answer your question.
We have a question from Phyllis, from Joanna Baruch, who is asking, since one has limited time looking forward at the end of life, and being younger is so much about looking forward, expectations, possibilities, does she feel she is more intensely present, and does that bring fulfillment unto itself? And also a follow-up question, how has that affected your writing?
Well, Joanna Baruch is an artist, a marvelous artist, and I believe some of you have seen a piece of her work at the Institute. And her work is so archetypal. And all I can say is the answer is exactly what she has found throughout. Yes, it's a process. And yeah, everything is better. It does. Each stage was better, but I think I feel more humble than I used to about it. I think is perhaps I feel like the fool still is in me. I still do some of the stupidest things and say things I don't mean and hurt people when that's horrible. Snake. The serpent, the winged serpent is in the psyche, it's archetypal. You blurt out something, especially if you're or chatty, you say something without thinking and you hurt somebody who's very dear to you, you wouldn't hurt for a world. And it doesn't stop. I guess I don't know how to answer the rest of that, Joanna. But if you ever get a chance to see her work, it's very moving and beautiful. And she's got lots of room to grow.
Phyllis?
Yes, Virginia.
Phyllis,
Yeah, Virginia.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Hillman saying you are what you yearn for. Do you still have yearnings?
Oh my. Well, occasionally I yearn for death. I think I'll have to say the state of the world is depressing. And it's scary to see the climate change and what's happening. And I don't see it getting taken addressed. Instead of taking care of it, they're cutting through the ice. The vision of what's going on in the world is so horrific. And it's hard to face that. My husband died before, 3 weeks before 9/11. I was so grateful that he didn't have to deal with that at the point where he had wonderful dreams of being initiated and dreams of transformation. His death was marvelous. And I was so grateful. And that unfortunately, this is an ongoing, it's hard. Grief for I just had my great-granddaughter was just born. And I think, what are we going to leave for them? So I guess what happens at this point, you're not less worried about yourself and a little bit more about the world in which we live.
The Phyllis,
Yeah.
the winged serpent is a really potent symbol of Quetzalcoatl. I don't know how you say it, but it's the image between the worlds, the present world and the next world or the afterworld. So I think it's a really phenomenal symbol that your dreams evoked for you.
Don't you think they often say, I'm going to interrupt you, they often say the first dream or the first few dreams you have when you go into an analysis can foretell sort of where you might end up? That's interesting because, Although I find it was so horrifying, so terrifying. I'll never forget it. I mean, it was so real. It's still there.
Well, it's a portal. And I think, at least for me, you said you started feeling this from 77 to now, this part of your life.
This last book, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
And
I finished it when I was early in my 80s. The book has been, I wrote it over a period of time, and then it got published, and this is the first time I've read from it. I wouldn't read this book to anybody other Jungians, because I don't think they get it, frankly, a lot of it anyway. It's a Jungian oriented book.
I'm curious to what your relationship is to the next stage of dying.
So am I. But I don't know. I'm not afraid to die in that sense. I feel comfortable. I can't go with letting go. After watching what my husband was still having transformative dreams at the end, and I feel unafraid of that. Death is another door. It'd just be interesting to see maybe I'll just be particles. A little bit
So,
out there.
so that image is the portal.
Maybe.
I mean, that's what
Yeah.
one of its symbols is, the portal between these worlds.
You mentioned your husband's transformative experiences before he died.
Yeah.
What do you think was key in helping him prepare to have those experiences? Was it lots of analysis? Was it meditation? Was it other things?
Jerry had a genius IQ. His father was the Supreme Court judge in Indiana, and he wanted him to be a lawyer, and he refused. So he caught a train, and he rode it clear out to California to his aunt. And what he learned during this was in a Depression era, and he saw all these adult men on the freight trains, men by the road, people by the roadsides with a can of beans. By the time he got to California, he realized he had something he had to do to become. He went back to his father and he agreed to go to medical school, and he became a surgeon. And he was in World War I, World War II. I'm sorry, not in World War I. And he was sent to Guam, and he came back weighing about 98 pounds. He went into private practice and decided it wasn't satisfying. So he went to see Palmer Gallup. I don't know who Palmer Gallup became an analyst in San Francisco, but before then he was in Indiana. And Palmer Gallup, he was telling his frustration with life and the process of just taking care of people and what have you. And he said, well, you want a different job? And he said, well, I like what you've got. You're just sitting there with your foot up, and here I'm running myself ragged. I do this and I give lectures and I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm going frantic. And he says, well, I'll get you a job. So he quit his very active practice and took a 3-year residency at a mental hospital. He cured a woman who was psychotic by talk therapy. And then he came and he worked with a wonderful Jewish woman who was a therapist in Chicago. And she had a picture of Jesus on her wall. And he said, how come you've got a Christian symbol on your wall? She said, well, he was of divine insight, a divine being. And so anyway, he came out and he ran his first wife was an alcoholic. So he ran an alcoholic clinic in San Francisco. And then he became chief of psychiatry at Oakland Kaiser. And then he became a Jungian analyst. So I guess, I don't know if I've answered the question. What was his insight at the end was that he was being initiated by a circle of other illuminated beings. And that was one of them. And one of the other ones was, he was sitting in a chair by the fireplace. I just had an image that I have just discovered. There are about 100 elements known in nature. I just discovered the number 101 or something like that. It was just sort of hysterical. The other thing is, however, when he was dying, he said to me, "I love you. I really love you." And I've treasured that too. So I don't know what. Love, I think, was sort of the key to who he was. He loved his patients, and he let everybody in his department do talk therapy as long as they wanted to. Kaiser didn't like it, but his patients did. So, I don't know what.
Phyllis,
Yeah.
hi. I'm Tiffany, and I just want to say thank you for sharing all the thoughts. I mean, all the things I heard like are new to me, and I really appreciate how you read and shared all your visions and dreams. I'm 24 years old, by the way, and I think death is a truth to everyone, not just for like people in that certain age. And when you mention about what you yearn for is what you desire, at the same time you ended your reading by saying what really matters is kindness. That's what I understood. My question is that, is it possible for young people of my generation to achieve such consciousness in their life's desire before achieving certain age or certain maturity or level in life?
I think you wouldn't want to be where I am. It's too heavy. But what I will like to say, I taught freshman composition at,
Okay.
at St. Mary's College, as
Mhm.
well as the MFA and whatever. And the first assignment was always, because they hate composition. They've been in high school where they got these red marks all over the pages, and they
Mhm.
just hate having to take this class. So their first essay is to write an essay about something that was important in your life. And I bet a third of them were dealing with some family death. It is, young people have death and they lose their grandparents, they lose their parents, they lose family members. Death is real for young people. And I think those students who have experienced it they just took off. They started writing really, they loved it, and there was no more resistance about writing. And all I ever did when I critiqued a paper was I would write, "This is what you're really doing well, and this is what you need to work on." No marks all over the page. And that's what makes young people feel accepted, feel heard. They don't thrive well on criticism. And unfortunately, that's mostly what adults give them.
Yeah. And like we hope that we have like the same teacher as what you've did, same person in our lives to like stimulate that feeling, because not all can do that and tend to be like us, so distracted and focus on the critic rather than the inspiration of expressing our feelings.
Discovering who you are. If you can discover, I mean, look how what it took for Jung to figure himself out. He wasn't really, I mean, he had a crazy mother, and his father was kind of a minister who didn't want to be a minister and didn't really believe what he believed, and he was really messed up.
Yeah.
And I think you're lucky to touch this so young. That's a gift. Blessing.
Thank you for being a gift as well. And I think it's good for us, like in this generation right now, to hear certain books to and those literature that would like touch other than like what technology can give us, and like new things right now. And like you mentioned, it's hard, like the global warming, and you're experiencing this kind of changes. It's 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 alarming, because it's also a question, what will happen to my children? It's also a question, what will happen to my grandchildren? And thank you so much.
I would just like to, this is just an observation, but as you were reading and talking, I really had a sense that you have this really unusual hospitality toward these images, these dream images or meditative images, that the hospitality you have somehow allows those images to come to you. And even the way you talk about them and read them, you don't feel, it doesn't feel like you try to block them or judge them or interpret them too much. But I just was impressed with that hospitality.
Thank you. And I want to say something about that. I know Jane and Joe Wheelwright were really close friends of ours. And Jane was John was a huge guy, and she was tiny, 4 feet something or other. But she was great. She was raised on her family ranch, the Wheelwright Ranch, which was huge. It was an enormous estate. And Jane was raised kind of like a wild creature. And but she came to the institute used to be really small. There were only we would have retreats. There'd be about 40 people there and their families, and we would all be together, and we'd sit around the fire in the evening. And Jane one day was really, really pissed off. She was so angry. She said, "You know what? Now that I'm old, I don't dream anymore." She was really irritated about it. And I actually find it that I'm not dreaming as much. It's frustrating because when you get so used to being able to depend on dream life to tell you what you're not conscious of, and then suddenly it just goes away and you're not dreaming very much, and you throw the I Ching and you get a little tired and bored with the I Ching after a while, even though I wrote a book about it. But it's being open for it is an adventure.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Isn't it? Don't you guys, one of the wonderful things, I'm going to do another reading out there in the other world. And what's unusual about this group is there's nobody here who doesn't get it, who doesn't go to the unconscious and receive it, right? Don't you? I know you do, even though you're being very quiet.
Thank you, Phyllis. It's Shirley. I was glad to hear you say you're not afraid of death, afraid of dying. And right?
Right.
And you had a positive experience with your husband's dying.
Absolutely.
And I think for those of us who've had the gift of being with somebody that you dearly loved when they die, that prepares us in a way that takes away fear. That's my feeling. And I also think the dreams that we've been given, and I'd like to share one dream that I had in 1996 when my sister died. And I think if nothing stays with me, I hope this dream does. Because in the dream, a candle is embedded in a large iris. And as I light the candle, some of the petals fall, but it doesn't disfigure the whole. And I take such comfort in that dream. It's probably one of the loveliest dreams I've ever had. And it was at the time of my sister's death. And that summer, I had taken her out in her wheelchair out into a garden filled with irises. So to have this huge iris, and remember that dream of death that Marie-Louise von France talks about in her books, Dreams of Dying, where there's a candle that's lit on one side of the window,
And
it
it
goes out and then reappears lit on the other side. So I think we're very fortunate to have our dream life to aid us in the process as we go to the unknown. That's all.
and it remains unknown. I think the capacity, I mean, Keith talked about negative capability, the capacity to stay and hold and not demand somebody, some hocus pocus to try to get the other side and find out all about it so you won't be afraid. Instead of just trusting that life will carry you, something will carry you. And thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Shirley? Shirley?
Yes.
Oops. Frozen.
I think we've lost
Mallory.
Mallory. Your upbringing reminds me of two things. That your relationship to your father was kind of like Jung's relationship to his father, being the child of a minister.
Yeah, and getting and dumping it too pretty quickly.
Well, and yeah, there's sort of a reaction to all of that, which is, but the other thing is what really struck me is your father's attitude towards anger and how that relates to my own upbringing. Only kind of, it was the opposite kind of upbringing. My father was not religious, and my father was this unpredictable, explosive person who could just jump into these destructive rages. But as a consequence, I think my relationship to anger is a lot like yours for the opposite reasons. Anger is like this taboo, absolutely taboo thing, and not something that I easily can metabolize. And in your case, you got to the same place almost by the opposite path. It was suppressed from around you. Whereas in my own upbringing, my father's rage was the only one that was permissible, not anybody else's.
Unfortunately, that's probably more frequent than in our society than otherwise. That must have been horrific, difficult to have that energy, negative energy, explosive energy in one's environment. It would be really hard. I was thinking about anger. That book Sundered was all about rage. When it came out, the serpent was in my environment. I was being struck by it. But I think it's interesting, the balance, trying to find the trouble with, it sounds like both of us, is one is overwhelmed by anger being a stoner, and one is suppressed by it. My father suppressed it because he had a violent older brother that drove him off the family farm with a pitchfork when he was very young. And he had to support himself and deal with his own being bullied, and he just couldn't bear that. But he was not the person who had assaulted me. I don't know if people are clear about that. And he just was in this, I was born in the Depression. So I think what I was thinking about, what Tiffany was saying about the times you live in, you can't imagine what it was. I was born in 1932, the depth of the Depression. And my mother had a role in the church. My father had a very busy profession. He was gone every day, every night. And they had a cowgirl, a farm girl who came in and took care of me as a baby, because my sister was 4 years older. My brother was 8 years older. And my mother had had pleurisy and was whatever. So, but from the time I was about 4 and 5, they had to let her go. They couldn't afford it. So my father was babysitting me in the church alone a lot, and something happened there. So, but it took me until maybe 40 years later before I finally realized what had happened, because everybody else said it was your father. It was your father. And my brother was furious with me, saying it couldn't be. It's totally impossible for him to assault. But I had to live with that mystery for years. And I think anger, rage, there's so much rage in our culture right now that it's something all of us have to face. Anger is rage. You go out walking and somebody will scream. I had a friend who was out. I'm going to tell a story on Deborah Grady. She was out walking on a path alone, and some guy came by and started screaming at her, and kept screaming at her as he was just being angry. Just all she was doing was meditating, sitting there by herself. And it teared me. I said, don't go up there alone anymore. But I just think we live in a very angry culture and world, maybe, not just every time you turn the news on, it's something else horrible. And you need to keep your spirit holy and in place, and loving and charitable towards yourself. And being charitable towards yourself is probably, if you're raised with too much Christianity, it's probably the hardest thing you ever did. I don't know. We have somebody here who's deeply involved in being spiritual there. Jude, do you want to say something about that? About spirituality and being self-forgiving?
Well, I think that it's really important, is that we've got forgiving self is really important. Because otherwise we get angry with ourselves and we project that onto other people. Forgiving ourselves for who we are, for what we've been, what we've fallen into, which is mainly not our own things.
How do you do that?
I think you begin by owning who you are and accepting it as a positive thing. The church has been terrible at pushing too much crap and shit onto us and blaming us for being terrible and wicked and sinful. Franciscans are really steeped in the theology of Blessed Don Duns Scotus, who says the atonement, the redemption, Jesus coming to earth was not because we were sinners, it was because God was in love with us and wanted to share our life. And when you look at it from that point of view, He turns the whole picture upside down. God comes because God wants to share our life with us, because he's in love with us. So we must be good human beings. We must be a good thing. And there's too much this sin, which is all about power and keeping people down, been preached for too long. People have got to realize that they're good things. You know, people are very, very good, no matter who they are. And they've got to own that positive side. They've got to rid themselves of the demon voices that put them down and accept the positive that's within them. And I think that's what our job as analysts is, and people who are interested in Jung, because that's what Jung was trying to do, get people to own the positive and live into the positive, not to respond to the negative in that way. Important.
It looks like Jane has a question.
Yeah, not a question. I'm circling back to the dreams of death that we were talking about earlier, and I'm pretty much a sensate, and so my dreams tend to be very down to earth. And and I did have a dream of death after a good friend of mine had died. I must have been in my 40s at the time, and I was walking down the street, and she was walking towards me. And so as we passed, I turned and I walked with her a little ways, and I said, "Lynn, I thought you were dead." And she said, "Oh yeah, but it's okay. You get used to it." Just wanted to share it.
Yeah. Sense of humor never hurt.
Do we have anyone else who would like to share something or ask a question?
Me, please.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Phyllis, can I ask a one word from you, like from these vision and dreams of dying? Where is it coming from?
What do you mean? Where does it come from?
I mean, is what kind of like emotion? Is that from the emotion? Is that from the regrets? Is that from everything, the experiences that you experience personally, or in one word?
It's an easy answer, is it comes from whatever it is living. Someone said there is a part, I just was talking about this, what it is in the psyche that was Rinpoche, I think, was a Buddhist position, that what Buddha means is that Buddha is awake all the time. And that Buddha mind is awake in us all the time. We don't always access it. And it knows what death is. It also knows whether we're ignoring it or not. So the Buddha mind is there, and we in Jungian psychology we just say, well, it's the unconscious with a capital U. And Buddhist, it's an all-knowing source that you can tap into that knows everything. And you think we're talking about that symbol, Mallory, about the archetypal nature of that serpent, but the serpent eyes never shut. And it has wings, and it's a chthonic, it's a dark image for what could be seen as a more gentle light, the light of understanding. And the light needs darkness in order to see itself. So it isn't just all goodness and light either. I don't know if that answers. It's an impossible question, of course.
It's okay, I understand. Yeah. Thank you.
Somebody over here. Who is this? Yes. Can you speak? Go ahead.
Lynn, yeah.
You asking
Yeah,
me?
I'd love to hear from you.
Oh, yes. Well, a couple of things. One is I was so impressed when you talked about yearning and that Jung or finding Jung had saved your life.
Yeah.
And I was reminded of my own experience yearning to find a religious or a spirit, not religious, a spiritual connection within me in the church. And the church I grew up in, Presbyterian, didn't do it. And I went to every church in college. I made a decision to try every single church in the whole Bay Area to see if I could find one where I could have a spiritual experience. And it never happened. And then I went to the Vatican hoping for the same thing. And I had a terrible experience there. I was wearing a purple suit, all dressed up, and a scarf on my head, very respectfully. And a little woman with widow's weeds pointed to me and started screaming in Italian, "She's a whore!" And so that so shattered me that the Vatican was not the place where I found a spiritual connection whatsoever. But then I found Jung, and I had a dream where I felt like I had come home. And that coming home was an amazing experience for me. So when you said it was coming home for you too, I just was really drawn by that.
It has no doctrine except to find your way.
Yes.
And to be open and without anybody telling you what's right and what's wrong.
Yes. And I had one more thing to add, and that's very different from the personal story I've just told, but I'm a therapist, and one of my clients one day, who was also a sensate type, I was thinking of you, Jane, had a very powerful dream that portended his death. And that was, he was in his room where he lived, and he heard a loud knock, knock, knock on his door. And he knew what was on the other side of that door was death. And that was his dream. And in fact, very shortly after that, he was diagnosed with an illness that ended up ending his life quite suddenly. So
The
that
unconscious knows already.
Yeah. So.
Wow, 3 knocks. The knock of fate.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much for what you've shared and for your dream and vision images. They've just been amazing.
Thank you.
Phyllis?
Yeah.
Phyllis?
Yes.
When you were talking about sundered and raged, when you got to the end of that, you said something that my computer froze, so I didn't get to hear it. You said life is wasted when you, and then my computer went blah, 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 blah. It was either Rilke or Jung who said that, but I don't know what it was.
If you do not find, let me see if it was Jung saying, see if I can find the quote. This is Jung's statement. In the final analysis, we count for something only because of the essential we embody. And if we do not embody that, life is wasted.
Okay.
It doesn't say, it just says life is wasted. I don't want to go beyond his words. I don't want. And when he says the essential, there are a lot of people saying, "Oh, Jung is an essentialist," and that's in the literary criticism, academic world. Essentialism is wrong. It's a no-no. But I think for Jungian psychology, the essential is very essential. It's what's the essence of something. So. I think that each individual is on a quest to embody what is essential.
So what do you think is the essential?
I think it's a mystery for each person to come to. What do you think?
I think it's God. Love, self-love. Inside,
Yeah,
outside.
yeah. Can't argue with that. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I appreciated the discussion, and I hope it was helpful.
This has been wonderful, Phyllis. I really can't thank you enough for sharing with us.
It's not easy I'm very introverted, and even though I've been a teacher, I'll tell you a story about introversion. When I started teaching, I first taught at the community colleges. I was out at DVC, and I sat in a room with a whole room full of students, and I couldn't talk. And I sat there utterly dumbstruck for 20 minutes, and they didn't get up and leave. I mean, St. Mary's, after 10 minutes, if you weren't there, they were gone. But not this community college, and they just sat there. So what I did was I said, let's go around the room and each of you can introduce yourselves. And by the time they'd all gotten done, I could talk. So being an introvert is this is not something I will do again. I would only share with people like you. And I thank you for listening.